welcome back to Beyond the School Gate, a podcast that amplifies the voices of women in leadership and talks about what we do beyond the school gate, the good, the bad, and the funny. I am your host, Ruth. I'm solo today. I know we haven't had a viewer's choice in a minute. I've had a couple of the husband series, which people seem to be really enjoying. So yeah, just me today. Hopefully you're not disappointed, but I do have a great topic to talk about. It's kind of a viewer's choice, but it was something that a friend of mine raised and just said, hey, this is a thing. Can we talk about it? So we spoke about it. And basically it's, she asked me, as a leader, where do you get your support? And I thought, wow, it's a good question. I'd never thought about it. I know I've got a network, but I never thought about it in that way, like that intentional. So I was kind of like, it depends on what you classify as support. So one of the things that I explained to this friend was that when I moved to Australia, I had no network. I had no social capital. I'd been in the UK my whole life. And had a really good established strong network that if I needed support or I needed to troubleshoot something, I could pick up the phone and be like, hey, what do you think about this? Or there's stuff going on in the sector. I can be like, hey, what? You've got somebody to just bounce stuff off, ask questions, have a bit of a vent about something that might be happening within the sector. There was like a handful of people that you can pick up the phone and talk to. So moving here, I was like, I actually don't have that. So when she asked me the question, where do you get your support? It really forced me to think about, well, where do I get my support? Obviously, I get my support from Ahmed, my husband, and from my family, and from my friends that are scattered all over the world. But thinking about like localized support, the way how I explained it to her was that I've essentially built my own, I suppose you'd call it my personal executive team, if that makes sense, or my own personal board. That's probably a better way to explain it, my own personal board. So I'm kind of like thinking, who are the people around me that can help lift me up, that can give me really sound advice, that know the sector, know the space, have operated in leadership positions, that can help kind of navigate that. And the way that I approached that from a place-based perspective was, don't judge me, I stalk people on LinkedIn. Think about it. I moved from the UK to Australia, spent 8 weeks in Brisbane. I didn't know anybody in Canberra. So I was like, well, I'll hop onto LinkedIn. And I just looked at like Canberra-based people. I Googled Canberra-based organizations and then went and searched that organization in LinkedIn and then looked at who came up, looked at who was active on LinkedIn and the things that they were saying, the way that they were saying things that were important to them and that they seemed really passionate about, and thought, oh, you're my tribe, you're my people. And that's just kind of how I did it. And then when I arrived in Canberra, I was like, hey, I'm new, fancy grabbing coffee. Some people ghosted me. I won't name and shame. Some people didn't respond, but a huge amount of people did. They said, absolutely, let's go for coffee. Or come to my office or whatever, let's go out for lunch. And it was just having conversations, asking open questions, asking things about their experience, where they've worked before, how the sector kind of works, how the sector's connected, what's the relationship with government, all of those type of things, just to kind of understand. So I was quite, I suppose, out there and just kind of stalked people online on LinkedIn in a professional capacity and just said, hey, I'm here. Which I think is proven pretty successful, if that makes sense. I've also looked at I'm aware of my gaps. Let's just put it that way. I'm aware of the areas a lot of the areas, obviously not all, because nobody knows everything, but I'm aware of a lot of the areas that maybe I'm not as strong in as I could be. So I intentionally look for people that are particularly strong in that area, because then I can learn from them. There's a learning opportunity. I can observe how they do things and then mimic in a way, but put my own little slant on it, or take the good bits that fit with my values and my style and kind of collect bits and bobs from different people and create my own style, whilst obviously keeping my own style at the heart of kind of how I do things. So that's, I suppose, kind of how I built a network around me from nothing. The other thing I do is people that I work with, I like to maintain good relationships with people. I like to maintain relationships with people. So I may have worked with you, I don't know, my first job here. We'll still be going out for coffee. We'll still be texting. We'll still be having lunch. We'll still be having like, I don't know, going for a bushwalk or whatever. Like I enjoy maintaining relationships with people and supporting them on their journey as well. So there's a few people that have managed me in other roles that I now consider friends. And there's people that I have managed in other roles that I now consider friends, because I think learning happens both ways. For those of you who know me in real life, I'm not a hierarchical person. Does that make sense? Like you can only learn from looking up. You can learn from looking, I hate that. Don't even get me started on the hierarchy. I know this is kind of traditional, that's the hierarchy. I prefer to look at it as like a long line, and we're all somewhere along that line, and some roles have more responsibility and accountability and legal implications and others don't. So there is a sense of, I suppose, seniority and risk and all of that. But the way I engage with people, I suppose, is on a continuum, is on a line, and we've all got an important part to play. And if one person's not doing their bit, it has ripple effects on other people. So wherever you sit on that line, for me, I feel like there's a huge amount that I can learn from everybody. So I tend to kind of collect people who want to maintain relationships and maintain friendships, and just maintain relationships beyond working together. And that's how I kind of built my network. So there's a lot of people that I'll call up and be like, hey, like, oh, this thing is happening in the sector, or hey, this thing's happening at work. Like, how have you navigated situations like that? Or just seeking advice from people. I think that you probably have learned, I'm a bit of a chat box, and I enjoy learning things from other people and trying new things. I always think there's, where there's a will, there's a way. And I always think there's a positive way to like achieve good outcomes. So if I don't have that skill or that kind of insight in that moment, talking to somebody else, I'm like, oh, I do. Or if, for example, I don't know, I've got an ex-colleague who's now a friend that's thinking about like their next move and where they want to be and all of that stuff. And I'm like, well, let's meet up. Let's do your own personal theory of change. Let's do these things. Like, if I can help you with something, of course I'm going to do it. And the relationships go vice versa. So I suppose when the person asked me where I get my support from, I suppose that was a long-winded way of telling that person that it was through friends and family, like existing relationships, but also not being afraid to build new relationships. I think sometimes as we get older, there's a narrative that it's really hard to build friends as you get older. That hasn't been my experience of when I moved to Canberra. I feel like I've got a really strong support network, a really strong friendship network. I haven't found it hard to build friendships and relationships, but I know everybody's different. So for some people, it will be a little bit harder, and that's okay. But I think just reaching out and saying, do you want to go for coffee? And being open when other people reach out and say, hey, you fancy grabbing coffee? You fancy grabbing lunch? Absolutely. So I think sometimes there's also, less so now because there's more of a narrative around vulnerable leadership than I think there ever was. But I think back in the day, there was a perception that leaders didn't need support, that they were fine, that they had their poker face, there was no vulnerabilities, that they kind of steady Eddie, just like nothing to see here, nothing to see here. And I think there's a different narrative I've noticed forming over time around vulnerable leadership and about being open with people, not to the extent where they think you're fragile and they can't take the hard stuff to you, but just being open and honest and not being afraid to share in some areas that maybe traditionally people wouldn't have shared. Leaders do need counsel. I think it's really important. And I think it's important to find your group of people that you can share, that you can have those open and honest conversations with as well, if that makes sense. So thinking about how you are supported, let's start a conversation down below, and let's have a think about who's in your network, who supports you, Why do those people support you? Have you intentionally chosen them, or have they just been in your life and it's been incidental? How have you built your support network and your social capital? And how has that gone for you? Was that easy? Was it hard? Any advice for anybody who may be new to leadership and is thinking about where can they pull on their support networks? I think the person was asking me because they're new to leadership and didn't want to go to their line manager for everything, for fear of there being a perception that they couldn't cope or they didn't know what they were doing, if that makes sense. So she was just kind of asking, well, where do you go? And that was just the advice that I gave, and because it works for me. But obviously my view is one view, it works for me, won't work for other people. So comment down below and let's start a little bit of a conversation and a community going. So yes, thank you so much again, guys, for tuning in. If you're on YouTube, I hope you've enjoyed a little bit of branding. You know, I'm getting the hang of this. I kind of know what I'm doing a little bit now, maybe. And on Spotify, if not, I've just got my computer screen to the right of me, which has some branding and some logo up there that actually my daughter did. So thank you guys once again for tuning in, and I shall see you in the next one. Bye.